We're going to live in a world with hundreds of thousands of competing tokens. The world of single currency or even a few currencies dominating is a thing of the past. Not like value is something magical that is endowed upon currencies by a government with some kind of magical wand.
Told you to snap up a modest position of currency minted from factoring digits. Which of you listen? Which of you listen? Which of you listen?
I'm joined here today by the wonderful Andreas Antonopoulos, who is a long-time cryptocurrency advocate, very well known in the space. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
Nice to talk to you, Naomi.
And so this is for my What is Blockchain series. So let's start off with that. What is blockchain?
That's a difficult question to answer because the term has been overloaded. So if I was to answer what is Bitcoin, it would be a different question than what is blockchain. I think to many people, blockchain is really a term that's lost all meaning and is used primarily to market cool-sounding technology. Blockchain is one of the constituent technologies of Bitcoin and other digital currencies and digital platforms. And it is a system that can be used to decentralize trust, to create systems that can be trusted without anybody being in control. And we see that kind of most strongly in the first blockchain, which is Bitcoin. But then again, blockchain is also used by companies that make systems where they're not decentralizing trust. And so they're building these things that could more aptly be described as private databases, but they call them blockchains because then they can get more funding.
Right, it's like this magic word at the moment. You add blockchain to your company and suddenly the price of the value of the company shoots straight up.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really quite annoying. So I tried to use a qualifier, and I talk about open blockchains. And to me, open blockchains are the interesting things. These are the open public systems that are borderless and neutral, censorship resistant, open to all, and not controlled by anyone. And there's a lot of cryptocurrencies and digital platforms and smart contract platforms that fulfill the qualification of being open public blockchains. And I think that's a better use of the term.
How would you describe blockchain to someone just entering the space? What techniques do you use and how do you describe it to someone who's unacquainted?
It depends on the context and who I'm talking to. I think this technology at a very basic level allows us to have these very large diversified networks running with software on people's computers that create these collaborative systems where you can have trust that certain things will happen in a predictable way. And the most obvious application of a trusted, decentralized platform like that is money. And of course, the first example of a blockchain is a blockchain used to support the issuance and transmission of currency called Bitcoin. So it's a payment network and a currency that doesn't require anybody's trust and isn't controlled by anyone. And then that concept can be taken to other applications. You can use it for all kinds of financial instruments. You can also use it for trusted applications like voting or governance of corporations. And again, that's using the underlying structure, which is one where thousands of people collaborate, but no one's in charge.
When and why did you first get involved in blockchain?
I first heard about Bitcoin sometime in 2011, and I dismissed it because I thought it was some kind of gambling-related nerd money. And then the second time around the middle of 2012, I read about Bitcoin again, and this time it had, the article I was reading had a link to the Satoshi white paper, which describes the function of the system. And when I read the scientific white paper, and because of my background in distributed systems computing, it immediately clicked, and I understood this was far, far more than what I thought it was. It wasn't simply a sort of gambling money or an internet currency. It was a lot more than that. And that's when I got involved full time. So I dropped everything else and just dove in.
So what was it that attracted you? What was beyond the use as an internet money that you thought, wow, this is revolutionary?
It's the openness. It's the fact that we've managed to get a system of global communication with the internet, which is open to everyone, and that has changed society already. But what could happen if you could do that to trust? what if you could have a network that allows you to have an open system for trust that you can use for applications where trust is needed, without having to trust the central party? Money, of course, being the obvious application for that. And to me, the idea of taking money and value in financial instruments and turning them into the same architecture as the internet and making them an open worldwide network was just fascinating.
What do you think is the most exciting application of that openness and that tech?
Well, again, I think a lot of people immediately go to this, I'm interested in the other applications of blockchain and not just money, which to me is a bit of a bullshit answer, quite honestly. I think money is the most compelling application. And because money is seen, as the root of all evil or something dirty, and it's fairly taboo in most societies, we try to downplay our interest in money because it's considered uncouth to be interested in money. But when you think of money as a technology, it's a very interesting technology. And the implications of changing the technology of money will have a deeper impact on society than pretty much any other technology we change right now. So I still think that the vast majority of the early applications of blockchain are purely in the domain of money, and that the impact of those applications will be enormous. That doesn't mean you can't do other things. It's just that in order to do the other things, you first have to do money, and the impact you have from money is probably bigger than all of the other things.
Where do you think that money as an application of blockchain tech is going to have the biggest impact? Do you think it's here in the United States? Do you think it's places like Venezuela or China, where you have really scary governments that put really strict capital controls on everything?
Yeah, I would say that it has the least impact, at least in the early stages, in the developed world. So Western Europe, the United States, North America really already have functioning money systems, functioning economies. But they only serve about 10 or 15% of the human population. The other 85% of humans operate in environments with very poor political freedoms, very poor financial freedoms, very inadequate access to the technology of finance or to the world economy. And so for them, the ability to access the world economy in uncompromising terms, without controls and restrictions, in an open way, is a radical change.
Do you think that we're going to see mainstream adoption of Bitcoin anytime soon?
I don't think mainstream adoption is really the goal, because mainstream adoption is kind of this great harmonizer or homogenizer. Bitcoin encompasses certain principles which are most useful in areas where there's a lot of friction with money in the current financial system. The idea of making these digital currencies suitable for the average Westerner to buy a cup of coffee isn't as interesting as the possibilities of banking billions of people who are unbanked and giving them financial freedom. So I'm not sure mainstream is the goal, and it's certainly not the goal if we have to dilute the principles. But I don't know when that happens. It could take 5 years, it could take 20 years.
And what do you think the biggest hurdles are for it to becoming adopted in places where you have many, many people who are unbanked, for example?
Oh, there's a variety of hurdles. The biggest one at the moment is the maturity of the technology. The technology is simply not ready. It's not easy enough to use. It's not easy enough to secure. It requires a level of technical literacy and numeracy that makes it unsuitable for broad adoption yet. But that's just a matter of iteration. It keeps getting easier and easier to use, more intuitive to use, more secure to use. And as it does so, it opens the door to more and more people being able to use it as a choice.
A lot of people, when they're throwing stones at Bitcoin, say, oh, it's a Ponzi scheme, it's tulip mania, it doesn't have any value. Why do you think Bitcoin has value?
Because other people think Bitcoin has value. Because it has useful applications, and because it has applications that other forms of money cannot currently serve or do not currently serve. And as long as there are uses where it can be applied that other things cannot be applied, and people who find it useful and have a need for it, that use gives it value. And so that's basically what gives it value, which isn't different from how all other currencies have value. They have value because people find them useful and because they use them. And as long as they do, they have value. It's not like value is something magical that is endowed upon currencies by a government with some kind of magical wand. And I think the emergence of viable, secure, robust, global private money like digital currencies like Bitcoin proves that value is not derived by some magic action of government. And in fact, governments really, in the end, have very little control over the national currencies, even though they pretend to have control. As we've seen when crises emerge and they're incapable of resolving them.
So what do you say to the naysayers to differentiate between a Ponzi scheme and Bitcoin?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer, but generally speaking, in order to have a Ponzi scheme, you need two things. One is the Ponzi and the other one's a scheme. Ponzi, as in the actual gentleman who was at the head of that scheme where money was reinvested from new investors in order to pay existing investors and to pretend that there was profit involved. That was a scheme that was orchestrated by a single individual in order to benefit themselves or to hide losses. In the case of Bitcoin, there is no Ponzi because there's no one individual or even group of individuals who are orchestrating anything in order to make it that. And there's no scheme because, again, nobody's orchestrating anything. It's a free and open system, and it's completely voluntary as to whether you want to participate. Now, whether it is representing real value or whether the value is purely speculation based on offloading the debts or expectations of the current system into future investors and how different that is from the US dollar, I mean, that's a more of a philosophical argument, and you could say the same for pretty much any national currency. Most forms of currency have to do with future expectations. You think it's valuable because you think tomorrow someone will think it's valuable. That's how currency works. So you can't have a currency that doesn't have some future expectations. The real question is, are there useful applications of this currency that cannot be served by other currency? And there are useful applications. There are things that you can do with Bitcoin and other digital currencies that you cannot do with national currencies. And on its face, that is a source of value that is not speculative, that is utilitarian.
You mentioned earlier that you don't think the ultimate usefulness of Bitcoin is to be able to buy your everyday cup of coffee. So do you think that ultimately Bitcoin will be a B2B currency rather than a P2P one?
No, absolutely no. I think it's absolutely useful for individuals, but it's for individuals who have particular financial needs that are not currently served by the establishment. That means either if you're in a Western developed economy and you have a Visa card, then that is a very easy way to buy a cup of coffee. And there's no point really in getting engaged in all of the complexities of a digital currency just to do that. So then the question becomes, what if you don't have a Visa card? Well, then you don't have the freedom to use that to buy a cup of coffee. So then maybe you find use in digital currencies, which give you a level of financial freedom you didn't have before. But there's also other applications other than buying a cup of coffee. How about sending money to your immigrant family back home as an immigrant worker, which is an area where there's a lot of friction and a lot of cost for literally more than 1 billion people around the world who are immigrant workers and send billions of dollars home every year. Or if you're running a small business and you want to have clients in another country and you need to buy and sell supplies in other currencies in other countries, you're running an import-export business, you're paying partners abroad, all of those applications involve cross-border transactions, which are very difficult to do.
Right.
What if you're a worker who's selling services like web design or translation to customers who are in another country, and you're able to secure a level of income and a quality of life that is much better than the average quality of life the people around you have, because you're able to engage with customers abroad, as we see with a vast middle class that has emerged in, for example, India, outsourcing their skills to Western companies for web design and programming and call centers and things like that. Well, one of the big stumbling blocks there is, how do you get paid from abroad? And how easy that is. So those are all applications where Bitcoin could be used today. That have nothing to do with kind of the comfy life of buying shitty Chinese plastic toys with a Visa card for the average American consumer.
What do you see in Bitcoin's future?
The pace at which this technology is evolving has forced me to narrow or shorten my horizon for predictions. I tried to think more in terms of what's going to happen in the next 6 months, and even there, I don't speculate too wildly. It's impossible to know because every now and then a surprise emerges from within this ecosystem. The innovation that's happening is so pervasive, so deep, and so disruptive that it is very, very unpredictable where we're going next.
Are you optimistic about the future? And are you optimistic about how governments are going to be treating blockchain and cryptocurrency?
I'm optimistic about the future. I'm generally optimistic about these kinds of technologies. And I'm optimistic about the effect that governments will be able to have when they respond to this. I'm not optimistic that they will respond kindly. I'm not optimistic that they will respond with a spirit of liberty or respect for the civil rights and human rights of their residents, citizens, and subjects. But I am confident and optimistic that no matter what they do and however atrociously they behave, they will not be able to affect the future of this technology because it's outside of their control. They will whine and moan and scream and spread propaganda and accuse these digital currencies of all of the things that governments are primarily responsible for. And in the end, they'll have no effect on whether this technology succeeds or not, or propagates or not.
Do you believe that the government should have some role in trying to regulate cryptocurrency?
No, because primarily the whole point of cryptocurrencies is to apply regulation through mathematics instead of regulation through unelected committees. And so as one of the first things that these digital cryptocurrencies do, they disrupt regulators. They disrupt the very game of regulation because they propose that mathematical regulation is more predictable, less corruptible, less exploitable than human regulation through committees that have proven to be very corruptible. And so the people who choose to use these systems use them precisely because they are regulated by mathematics and not committees. And so there is really no role to play for regulators in that space, although they will attempt to apply their efforts.
Of course, they'll always try. What are some of the projects that you're most excited about going on at the moment?
You know, I'm excited by a variety of projects. At the moment, one of my main areas of focus is on virtual machine-based blockchains that operate smart contracts. That includes Ethereum, Ethereum Classic, Cardano, EOS, and various other ones that are doing the same thing, including Rootstock, which works on Bitcoin. All of these things go slightly beyond the basic payment functionality and into smart contracts, which are essentially programmable structures that operate according to a set of predetermined rules. So that's an interesting, that trusted computing environment is interesting to me. And I'm writing my 4th book on that topic. It's called Mastering Ethereum. It's coming out at the end of the year. But my interests vary and change all the time. So there's always interesting projects. I'm really focused on the technology. And so I don't really speculate on what the ICOs are doing or which project is making money or likely to make more money in the future.
What do you think about some of the toxicity going on in the Bitcoin community at the moment with different camps becoming very tribal?
But it's not just the Bitcoin community, but this is a natural outcome of having a complex environment with a lot of conflicting interests and a lot of people making a lot of money very fast. And so everything becomes controversial because everything becomes about positioning oneself vis-a-vis this image of future wealth that appeared. So as soon as there was serious amounts of money on the table, everybody dives for the center of the table to grab their share. And conflict happens. That's just part of human nature. I try to ignore most of this drama and focus on the technology. Ironically, you know, I think the saving grace is that while all of this infighting and tribalism is happening, the reason it's happening is because we're not subject to sufficient pressure and attacks from the outside. One of the ironies here is that the thing that will bring all of us together, and not just within the various camps of Bitcoin, but even within all of the camps between the various competing cryptocurrencies, is a nice, hefty, massive crackdown by government to remind us who the common enemy is or who the common adversary is and what the stakes are exactly. Nothing will bring Bitcoiners together than a big crackdown, which I think is going to happen and is inevitable.
It's a scary prospect thinking about the inevitable fight coming, because government isn't going to take this lying down. It's definitely threatening to their power structure. So what advice would you give people in the Bitcoin community or in the crypto community about this impending battle?
It's not government that's at stake here. Government is a wholly owned subsidiary of multinational corporations, and if government acts against crypto, they are acting in favor of and under the direct guidance of multinational financial services corporations that feel that their cartel oligopoly is threatened by this competition. And they're not too keen on capitalism or free markets because they find it's much easier to be rent seekers who cannibalize and parasitize our societies with the full endorsement and support of the government regulators that are supposedly doing oversight. So don't forget that when government starts attacking cryptocurrencies, it's because their masters asked them to. And the interests that are being threatened by competition in financial services are much bigger than governments. They're the multinational financial services who are dealing with hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of wealth, and a very narrow concentration of that wealth. So democratizing finance, which should be a slogan that everybody is very confident and happy about, sounds like the worst idea possible to those who happen to be at the top of our current financial system.
Do you think that there is any way that they could destroy Bitcoin if they wanted to?
No, they could disrupt, delay, and destroy specific iterations of this technology, only to have new iterations evolve to counter the exact types of attacks that they launch and become even stronger and more resilient. The more they attack this system, the more likely it is to evolve to become meaner, stealthier, more anonymous, more private, more evasive, and harder to control and battle. So that evolutionary response is extremely likely, and we're going to see it. Don't forget that Bitcoin itself is an evolutionary response to previous attempts at digital currency that was squashed. It's not the first digital currency. It's not even the 20th. Several attempts were made before. They were all squashed because they were too centralized, and Bitcoin is the first one that was decentralized enough that it couldn't be squashed immediately, and as a result has succeeded. If this iteration gets squashed, it will only give rise to the next evolution that will be even harder to deal with.
So what do you think about some of these commodity-backed currencies coming out now that provide these central focal points, again, back into the system for government to focus on and shut down? Do you think they're viable? Do you think there's an iteration that could work with them?
I'm very skeptical about commodity-backed stable coins and other forms of coins where there's a custodian who has some kind of commodity that they have to hold in reserve against the currency, because the problem that cryptocurrencies are trying to solve is the fact that there is a single custodian. So they're not supposed to have a single trusted party. Anytime you have a commodity that backs something, someone has to hold that actual commodity, and that makes them a trusted custodian, which kind of takes us back to where we were before.
Right.
If it was easy to do the trusted custodian thing and you could actually trust the custodian, then we could easily just go back to a world where we have currencies that are backed by gold or other commodities. But those failed because the custodian couldn't be trusted. Even when that custodian was, after the Bretton Woods Agreement, the US government until 1971, and then they showed the world exactly how much they could be trusted.
Yeah, right. It's a good lesson there. And it's also interesting to look at all of these iterations in the past where the government has shut them down. And we've tried these things, and it seems like sometimes we're going in a bit of a loop there.
If there is a point that can be stomped upon, it will be stomped upon. So the only way you can avoid that is by not having any central point of failure. And that's the only reason why Bitcoin has succeeded so far, is because it has avoided having any obvious way that you can disable it, any obvious central point of failure. And that's because all of the previous central point of failures were exploited. And so it's the next evolution.
Right. What do you think of the different scaling solutions out there at the moment for Bitcoin, and what do you think is most viable?
I think there's this false dichotomy that says that we have to choose one scaling solution over another, whereas in fact, in the long term, we're going to apply all of the scaling solutions that become available. Because as we apply each scaling solution to the network and its scale increases, that opens the door for more applications, at which point we reach capacity again. There is no end to the scaling game, because every level of scale creates new possibilities for new applications. So we're going to have to apply all of the scaling solutions. The primary battle was over which sequence they get applied, and it was more about who makes that choice and the power to make that choice, which ended up being a political consideration that had nothing to do with scaling. The many scaling solutions were more or less equivalent, but who gets to make the choice of what to do next and who can gain a slight advantage in the system became the fighting points. And as a result, we have a number of different approaches being attempted simultaneously by different forks of the network, just as we have across multiple cryptocurrencies.
Right. Do you think that there's room in the future for multiple competing currencies, or do you think that we're going to see one player winning out?
No, I think we're going to live in a world with hundreds of thousands of competing tokens used for different functions. And for the most part, you will see a user interface or wallet that hides all of that detail so that you don't even know how many different currencies you have in your wallet. You just see the aggregate value being displayed, and your wallet decides which currency is the best one to use for each circumstance. The world of single currency or even a few currencies dominating is a thing of the past. What we're going to see is proliferation. If you really accept that money is a language for describing value, then we're going to see the same thing happen as has happened with human languages. You don't have one language that replaces all others. You might have one that's somewhat dominant, as English is, but that doesn't negate the need to have the other languages. It just means that most people become multilingual. And so if most people become multilingual, what's the equivalent in money that most wallets become multi-currency wallets?
It sounds like a really exciting future, and it's definitely a paradigm shift from everything we're used to, going from a monopoly in the money supply to having unlimited choices out there.
Absolutely. That's the main transition.
Right. I have some questions from Twitter.
Oh dear.
I know, you should be very worried. What are your thoughts on Ripple? This comes from Sandman.
I'm not a particular fan of Ripple, but at the same time, it's not a topic I have spent too much time studying. I'm not a fan of some of the centralization aspects of it, but it's not really very big on my radar, so I'm not paying that much attention to it. And therefore, I'm not going to express a particularly strong opinion because I don't study it.
Danny Todd asks that if Bitcoin were to fall from its current dominant position, what factors do you think would have played into that? Why would it? What scenarios do you have in mind that could lead to that?
Well, again, I think it matters what measure you use, what metrics you use to measure the dominance of a currency. What is the metric that's most important? So we see a market that has emerged now where for some people, the most important metric is market capitalization, which seems interesting to me to measure because by market capitalization, the most centralized fiat that's backed by the most amount of quantitative easing would obviously win. So why are we adopting as a metric of success the legacy system? Measuring things by how much money you can print, when you can print unlimited amount of money, who has the most money wins, that doesn't really mean anything. Especially if we're denominating this in US dollars. So right now we're measuring cryptocurrencies by market capitalization in US dollars. That almost seems like that's exactly what you would do if you wanted to undermine cryptocurrencies. I'm more interested in measuring how many people does this empower and free from the current systems. How many new applications does this technology enable that weren't possible before? Whereas measuring something based on market capitalization is to assume that all of these systems are qualitatively equal and deliver the same amount of freedom, the same amount of human freedom and choice, which they don't, so that you can measure them that way. I think it's entirely the wrong measure. I don't think Bitcoin is going to remain the dominant digital currency in terms of market capitalization. The simple reason for that is that as soon as a government or bank creates some kind of centralized fiat digital shitcoin and throws a few $1 trillion of quantitative easing printed out of nothing, valueless dollars behind it, that's going to have the biggest market capitalization. And it's going to be the business as usual currency that pretends to be interesting. What is the point? So they win the market capitalization. Listen, if there's one thing we know is that banks have money. So if we're measuring things based on how much money someone has, then the banks will always win. That's not the interesting metric.
Right.
Freedom is an interesting metric. And
it's a great metric.
Those terms, I think Bitcoin will maintain its freedom dominance for a long time.
Nice. I have a question from Crypto Luke, who asks about the Lightning Network and some of the problems that come about when you close a channel.
I'm not sure what the problems are when you close a channel. First of all, keep in mind that the current formulation of the Lightning Network is still in progress. There are a number of different protocols that can be used for channel opening and closure, as well as routing. And they have advantages and disadvantages, but it's still an evolving target, and there's a lot of interesting innovation and competition in this space. As it stands today, you don't actually have to close a channel ever. You could keep a channel open and keep using it as long as you rebalance the flow of funds. A lot of people assume that in order to do a Lightning transaction, you first have to open a channel, do the transaction, and then close a channel, and that's not how it works. If you had to do a channel for every transaction, there's no point. Instead, what you do is you open a bunch of channels to give you enough connectivity into the network to be able to route through a variety of destinations. And then you can make as many payments as you want, and you don't have to ever close any of these channels.
Another question regarding Lightning Network is, if a business were to run a Lightning node and accept payments via channels, do you think that they would risk being prosecuted for being a money transmitter without a license? And do we have clarification from the government at all about how they might treat people who run a Lightning node?
Whether they could be prosecuted for any reason whatsoever, of course they could. And prosecutors can prosecute anyone for any reason they feel. Whether they're successful or not is a whole other question. I think if Lightning nodes were treated as money transmitters, that would cause the vast majority of Lightning nodes to move to jurisdictions where they're not treated like that. And it would put a damper on innovation, especially domestically in the US, and really restrict the options for growth of that environment in the US. But it won't change the future of the Lightning Network. It will just simply push that innovation elsewhere. And you know, it's just like doing the bit license in New York. In the end, all it does is push companies out of New York, but it doesn't change how the rest of the ecosystem works. It doesn't make sense in my mind to treat routing payments as a money transmission thing, especially when money isn't actually moving between points.
I have a question from Ahmed, who wants to know how Bitcoin and cryptocurrency could become useful when you're dealing with things like trade wars or sanctions.
Open, borderless, and neutral digital currencies that are not regulated by nation states in order to play geopolitical games or used as weapons in a militarized economic system of sanctions and trade wars become an exit and safe haven in such environments. So when the national currencies are not being used as tools of trade, but they're used instead as tools of war, as we see now, then the neutral currencies that are not playing those games become an exit. They become a safe haven, and people will start exiting the war-torn currencies to find safe haven in neutral, peaceful currencies that are not engaging in geopolitics, which makes the utility of those currencies much greater, because now they have a whole other application, which is hedging risk and protecting against geopolitical risk. So you have to understand that when the purpose of currency is perverted and it's used either as a tool of local law enforcement, such as a surveillance system, as we see at the moment in both supposedly free countries like in the US, where you have totalitarian surveillance of banking, and in not so free countries like China, where you also have even more aggressive totalitarian surveillance of banking. That's turning money into a law enforcement tool instead of letting it just be commerce. And when at the same time money is being turned into a military tool to be used to apply force to other nations through trade war and sanctions, both of those actions subvert the commercial utility of money. Money can either be used for commerce or it can be used for surveillance and war. But when you use it for surveillance and war, it stops working for commerce and it starts losing its value as a commercial tool, which means that if you have a money that only does commerce and is neutral in other circumstances, it will become more valuable when the rest of the money is being devalued by being used in these inappropriate ways.
I have a few marriage proposals for you here from people from internet, like BTC Sessions says he's not into dudes, but would make an exception for you. I presume it's going to be a no for most of them. So I'll have to break that to them. But then I also have questions from people who say, they've been blocked by you. What can they do to get unblocked because they miss you and they miss your tweets? I
have a zero tolerance policy towards trolling and harassment on Twitter, primarily because I have enough followers on Twitter where my channel and feed become completely unmanageable. If 1 in 1,000 people decides to start being sarcastic and trolly and attack me, that means I'm being attacked by 400 people a day. I don't have time for that. And so I just instantaneously block. And if in the future I discover I've made a mistake, I'll unblock people. But, the bottom line is that I don't owe anyone the benefit of reading my work or the access to my audience that they get by being able to mention me in their Twitter threads. And so since I don't owe them that, if someone's annoying me, I'll just turn them off and just remove myself from the conversation, remove them from my conversations, and then they don't get the benefit of the work I'm doing. I'm sorry, I can't kind of, try to figure out if someone's being annoying as a fluke or they're just being sarcastic or they're just trying to make a very bad joke. I get so much of that and I don't really have a very high tolerance for it. Then again, if you don't have access to my feed, it's not the end of the world. There's a lot of interesting things happening out there.
It is for some people, Andreas. It is.
Well, they should take life less seriously.
Absolutely. Well, this has been really, really wonderful. I really appreciate your time, and I definitely look forward to your new book that is coming out at the end of the year. What is the title of it?
So Mastering Ethereum, which is the second book I've written for O'Reilly. I wrote Mastering Bitcoin back in 2014, 2015, which is now in its second edition. And Mastering Ethereum is my second O'Reilly book. I'm writing it in collaboration with Dr. Gavin Wood, who's one of the founders of Ethereum. And that book is going to be available for purchase in December of 2018.
Nice. Well,
Christmas.
Good
Yes.
present ideas there. Well, I look forward to it, and I thank you so much for chatting with me today.
It's been a pleasure, Naomi. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Subscribe to the channel.
Yeah, subscribe to Naomi's YouTube channel.
Best endorsement ever.
Crypto Illuminati, forging a chain with all of my game, decentralizing elite.